Welcome to our deep dive. This time, we're looking at a whole new way of thinking about something pretty fundamental. What defines life
A
itself?
big question for sure.
We're going to be exploring this recent scientific paper titled The Physics of Life, exploring information as a distinctive feature of living systems, which argues that
Interesting.
information isn't just present in living things, it's actively used by them to achieve goals like, survival and growth. This
Mhm.
perspective
Right.
sets life apart from non-living matter in a way that I found really intriguing. And to unpack all of this, we're joined by our expert in the field.
It's a pleasure to be here. And yes, the paper does offer a very thought-provoking perspective on this age-old question of what is life.
Definitely. So the paper contrasts this informational perspective, as they call it, with other common ways of defining life, like those focused on Darwinian evolution or thermodynamics. Can you expand on those differences for our listeners?
Certainly. The informational perspective, it differs from those more traditional perspectives in that it really emphasizes that living systems
Okay.
utilize semantic information, which is information with meaning and relevance, not just random data.
Right.
They use this information to actively maintain themselves and resist decay, a process known as autopoiesis.
I see.
So even a single-celled organism, it's using information to persist, separate from any evolutionary context.
So it's not just about passing on genes over generations, but about using information in the present moment to stay alive.
Exactly. It highlights that constant interaction with the environment, using information to navigate challenges and achieve goals.
Fascinating. So the paper also goes into how researchers actually go about measuring this semantic information. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
One method involves introducing noise into an organism's sensory inputs.
Yeah.
So essentially, you're disrupting the flow of information from the environment. So imagine a simple organism that relies on detecting, say, food.
Right.
By adding noise to its food detection mechanisms, researchers can observe how the disruption of this information impacts its survival.
So by observing how it responds to this kind of informational noise, researchers can identify what information is really crucial for its survival.
Exactly. They've discovered what they call a viability threshold. Below this threshold, disrupting information has minimal impact on survival. But above this threshold, survival rates just plummet.
Oh,
And that indicates the organism really relies heavily on that specific information to stay alive.
and the paper provides some pretty fascinating examples of this in action, right?
Yes. For instance, in what they call forager models, where simulated organisms need to find food, adding noise to their food detection sensors reveals how crucial accurate information is for their lifespan.
I see.
Another example is the daisy world model, which is a simplified simulation of a planet with two types of daisies that influence the planet's temperature.
So applying this concept of disrupting information to different models to see what really matters for an organism or a system to thrive.
Exactly. In the Daisy World model, they found specific thresholds in those feedback loops between the bases and the planet's temperature, where only when information flow crosses those thresholds does the stability of the whole system get affected.
Huh. So semantic information is playing a crucial role in keeping that whole complex system in balance.
Yes, precisely.
That's really insightful. Now, the paper also explores this concept of the fitness value of information, which I found quite intriguing.
Yes.
Can you break that down for us a bit?
So the fitness value of information, it delves into how organisms use information not just for survival, but for growth and reproduction.
Okay.
It builds upon the concept of what we call bet hedging, which is a strategy for dealing with environmental uncertainty. Think of it like a diversified investment portfolio.
Right.
In an unpredictable environment, some individuals within a population will have traits suited for one condition, while others will have traits suited for a different condition.
So diversifying their traits, that increases their chances of survival, no matter what the environment throws at them. But how does this relate to information?
Well, the paper posits that this bet hedging, it can be understood through the lens of information theory.
Interesting.
Organisms gather information about their environment and use it to decide which traits to express, essentially making informed bets about what will best suit their survival and reproduction. And this decision-making process, based on this limited information, can be analyzed through a framework called rate distortion theory.
Hmm. Rate distortion theory. Could you unpack that a little bit more for our listeners?
Sure. Rate distortion theory, in essence, examines the most efficient way to compress information while minimizing the loss of crucial details. Think of it like trying to convey a complex message using as few words as possible. And the distortion represents those potential consequences of making a wrong choice based on incomplete information.
So organisms are always trying to gather and process information efficiently, making the best possible choices based on what they know, but also knowing that there are these risks associated with imperfect information.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The paper gives a compelling example. An organism that needs multiple nutrients will prioritize information about the scarcest one. This is because the potential negative impact, or distortion, is greatest if it lacks that specific nutrient. Essentially, organisms are driven to optimize their information processing to make the most advantageous decisions for their growth and reproduction.
Fascinating. So life is fundamentally driven by this constant optimization of information processing. It's a whole new way to think about how life works, is complexity.
Indeed.
And the paper even mentions the potential of using what they call chemostats, these controlled environments where growth rates can be precisely measured, to actually test these theoretical frameworks experimentally. It would be incredible to see these models play out in real biological systems. And speaking of pushing boundaries, this information-centric perspective has some really profound implications for understanding life's origins.
Absolutely. It reframes our whole approach to abiogenesis, the transition from non-living matter to life. Instead of simply searching for specific molecules, we can focus on how systems capable of using information for self-preservation could have arisen.
Right, so it's not just about the building blocks, but about how those blocks are arranged to actually process information, make decisions that lead to that self-preservation.
Precisely. And the paper even suggests that simple chemical systems, they might already exhibit minimal semantic information, laying the groundwork for true life to emerge. They propose a fascinating experiment using what they call a chemical garden, driven by a complex changing electrochemical gradient. And the idea is to observe whether the system's internal complexity responds to changes in the complexity of the driving force.
So in a way, looking for signs of learning or adaptation in a system that's not traditionally considered alive.
Exactly. It's a truly innovative approach to studying life's origins.
Absolutely. And this approach, this information-centric approach, isn't limited to Earth, right? It can be applied to extraterrestrial life and even artificial systems.
That's right. It opens up a whole new world of possibilities.
And that's a perfect segue to the next part of our deep dive, the implications of this perspective for astrobiology.
Looking forward to it. Welcome back to our deep dive.
So as we delve deeper into this information-centric perspective on life, we encounter some pretty exciting implications for astrobiology, this search for life beyond Earth.
Yeah, and it really highlights the challenges we face in trying to define what life is, in a way that could encompass potentially radically different forms of life than what we see here on Earth.
Right, we're working with basically just one data point, life as we know it.
Exactly, and that's why the paper emphasizes the need for what they call agnostic biosignatures.
Okay, agnostic biosignature.
Right, so instead of looking for specific molecules like DNA or proteins, which may not be present in extraterrestrial life, we should focus on more universal features of life, things like the ability to process information.
I see. So agnostic biosignatures, those broaden our search, help us avoid missing truly alien life forms.
Precisely. It allows us to look beyond those Earth-centric assumptions about, the chemical makeup of life.
So we're looking for complex information processing as that kind of fundamental characteristic of life.
Exactly.
Regardless of the specific chemistry involved.
Yeah, and one example of this is the search for patterns in electromagnetic radiation.
Okay.
Living systems, they emit and absorb radiation in complex ways.
Right.
And detecting these patterns remotely, even from light years away, could potentially signal the presence of life.
So analyzing the light from distant exoplanets, we could find signs of life.
That's the idea.
But how do we actually differentiate those signals from life from the ones coming from just non-biological processes?
Yeah, it's a big challenge. Distinguishing between biological and non-biological signals, that requires some very sophisticated analytical techniques.
I see.
So researchers are developing methods to analyze time series data, like fluctuations in light intensity, to look for patterns of information processing that would be indicative of that biological activity.
So we're not just looking for specific molecules, we're analyzing that complexity, the dynamics of the signal itself, searching for those signs of what we might call intelligent behavior.
Exactly. And that leads to other approaches as well, like analyzing atmospheric compositions.
Right, so life can significantly influence the chemical makeup of a planet's atmosphere.
Absolutely.
And detecting those changes, that could point to the presence of life.
Precisely. And that brings us back to, the recent debate about the detection of phosphine in the atmosphere of Venus.
Oh yeah, and the possibility of microbial life in its clouds.
Right. And while the debate about phosphine as a reliable biosignature continues, it highlights that potential of atmospheric analysis. We may be able to identify planets where life is actually actively modifying its environment by looking for those anomalies in the atmospheric composition.
So it's that dynamic interplay between life and its surrounding.
Right. And that's crucial to this informational perspective.
Right, life isn't just shaped by its environment, it actively shapes it in return.
Yeah, using information to modify its environment, creating conditions more favorable for its own survival and growth.
So we're not just looking for life itself, but for its impact on the environment, those fingerprints of information processing and that environmental modification.
Exactly.
Which brings us to a mind-boggling possibility, detecting life that's not just different from Earth life, but radically different, beyond our current comprehension.
Beyond what we can even imagine.
Right. How do we even begin to approach a search like that?
Well, it requires a pretty fundamental shift in our thinking.
Yeah.
A willingness to move beyond our preconceived notions of what life should look like. We need new paradigms for understanding life and its potential manifestations.
So we're not just searching for those familiar patterns. We're looking for anomalies, for anything that suggests a level of complexity and organization that can't be explained by known physical or chemical processes.
Exactly. And that's both daunting and exhilarating at the same time.
Yeah.
The universe is vast, full of mysteries, and this informational perspective gives us a really powerful new tool to explore those mysteries, expand our understanding of life's potential diversity.
It's a really profound shift in perspective.
It is.
This whole conversation has raised a question for me. If information is so central to life, does that suggest a kind of universality to life?
Interesting question.
Could there be these fundamental principles of information processing that apply to all living systems, regardless of their physical form, their origin?
That's a question of great depth, one that, really touches on the very essence of life. And while the paper doesn't explicitly address it, the possibility is certainly worth pondering. If universal principles of information processing do exist, it would suggest that life is not just a random occurrence, but an emergent property of the universe itself.
Wow, that's a pretty awe-inspiring concept.
It is.
It transforms the search for extraterrestrial life from a purely scientific endeavor into a philosophical one, a quest to understand our place in the grand scheme of things.
And as we develop these increasingly sophisticated tools for detecting and analyzing information, we may find that life is more widespread and more diverse than we ever imagined.
Well, this deep dive has been truly eye-opening for me, challenging our assumptions about life, expanding our horizons.
It has been my pleasure to be a part of it.
Now, let's move on to the final part of our deep dive, where we'll explore some of the ethical and philosophical implications of this new understanding of life. We've been exploring this really fascinating informational perspective on life, and it's challenged our understanding of what makes life tick, both here on Earth and potentially out in the vastness of space.
And as with any significant scientific shift, this new perspective raises questions that extend beyond just the technical. It prompts us to consider ethical and philosophical implications as well.
Absolutely. So if information processing is so central to life, how does that change our view of the living world around us? And what about artificial intelligence, which we're making increasingly sophisticated at, handling information?
Right. Well, let's start by considering our ethical responsibilities to other life forms here on Earth. We've traditionally drawn a distinction between ourselves and other species, often assuming a kind of hierarchy of intelligence based on complexity.
But this paper argues that even seemingly simple organisms, they engage in complex information processing that's essential for their survival and flourishing.
Exactly. And if we acknowledge that all life, from microbes to mammals, relies on information to navigate the world and achieve goals, it really challenges that notion of human intelligence as uniquely superior.
Right. It suggests a kind of informational kinship among all living things.
Precisely. And this could lead to a more expansive view of environmental ethics.
How so?
Well, we might need to start considering not just the physical well-being of organisms, but also their informational needs, their access to the information they need to thrive.
So preserving habitats, it isn't just about providing food and shelter, but also about protecting that informational richness of those environments, that complex web of signals and cues that organisms depend on.
Yeah, think about the impact of, say, noise pollution on marine life or the disruption of migratory patterns because of light pollution.
Right.
These aren't just physical threats, they're informational disruptions that can have these cascading effects on whole ecosystems.
This concept provides a whole new way of thinking about conservation. One that recognizes that critical role of information flow in maintaining the health and resilience of ecosystems. And this informational lens can also inform our approach to emerging technologies like artificial intelligence.
Absolutely. As we create systems capable of processing information, learning, and making decisions in ways that, increasingly resemble human intelligence, it begs the question, at what point might we consider AI to be a form of life itself?
That is a profound question. Are we talking about consciousness, self-awareness,
Yeah.
or simply a high level of information processing and adaptive behavior?
Well, the paper doesn't, offer definitive answers, but it does encourage us to consider the potential consequences of creating systems that might one day rival or even surpass human intelligence.
Right. A lot to consider. So if we create AI that exhibits this kind of semantic information use, this goal-directed behavior that we see in living organisms, do we owe it the same ethical considerations as we would a biological organism?
It's a question with some far-reaching implications for sure. It challenges us to redefine our understanding of personhood and consider, which entities actually deserve moral consideration.
Yeah.
This really underscores the fact that scientific progress always carries ethical implications with it. We have to be mindful of the potential consequences of our creations, especially as we, venture into this uncharted territory with AI.
Absolutely. And it all circles back to this idea of the potential universality of life.
Mhm.
If information is so fundamental to life as we know it, and if we're creating these artificial systems with similar capabilities, does that suggest that life might be even more common in the universe than we previously thought?
It's a captivating thought. Maybe the emergence of life isn't this rare accident, but a natural consequence of the way information interacts with matter and energy.
Ah.
Makes you think.
That raises the stakes for the search for extraterrestrial life for sure. We might not be alone, and the life we encounter might not be carbon-based or even recognizable as life, as we currently define it.
The universe is vast, full of possibilities.
This informational perspective has been a real revelation for me, expanding my understanding of life and prompting me to reconsider, my place within this vast information-rich universe.
And it underscores the interconnectedness of all things, reminding us that we're part of something much grander than ourselves.
This deep dive has left me with a sense of wonder and a renewed desire to explore the mysteries of the universe. And it's clear that we're only beginning to grasp what it means to be alive in a universe where information plays such a fundamental role. Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey, and we look forward to exploring more fascinating frontiers of knowledge with you in the future.